we are also doing this part as well. And remember, this is something I'll ask for on Monday, so you can finish it up over the weekend if you like. And we're going to talk our way through it today. Here we go. Manifest Destiny. Let's do this. Okay, so this guy, John O'Sullivan, he's the guy who comes up with this phrase. He is a newspaper editor, and he first wrote about this idea of manifest destiny back in 1845. And this is really what we were talking about before. The right of our manifest destiny to overspread and possess the whole of the continent, which Providence has given us.
Are we still in period 4 or are we out?
This is still period 4.
Okay.
Yep. We don't hit 5 until the Civil War starts. Which will start next week. Y'all believe we only got 11 school days until fall break? 1 day and 2 weeks till fall break.
If you think about it, we only have 3 tests left plus the final. It's
Oh, I know. At fall break, we're halfway through the course. Yeah. It's great. It's awesome. It's gonna be woo. Yeah. Okay. So, you don't need to memorize this quote, but the idea that God has given us all this land. The Americans should possess it, take it, because that is God's will. That's the big idea behind manifest destiny. And hey, sorry Native Americans, sorry Mexicans, sorry whoever else, this is God's will. I mean, you want to argue with God? Come on. And that's really how most Americans felt, and particularly the presidents of the time. Okay, so, here it is. John Gast, American Progress. And so y'all have been working with this, so you'll get to know how these lands come into our possession. And we are actually going to start with some of the treaties that we made with Great Britain. Now, of course, we made an initial treaty with Great Britain after the American Revolution, and of course that's how we got the original United States. But we're going to jump ahead to 1817 with the Rush-Bagot Treaty. And the Rush-Bagot Treaty does a couple of things, and I think we might have talked about this previously with maybe President Madison. The Rush-Bagot Treaty, between us and Great Britain, we will take all naval ships off of the Great Lakes. So it's really an unarmed border between us and Canada. Great Britain back then, but Canada now. And still, the border between us and Canada is the longest unfortified border in the world. There is not a whole lot happening there. There he goes. Creates the largest unfortified border in the world. We follow up the Rush-Bagot Treaty with the Convention of 1818, which will set the land boundary. Of course, the border between us and Canada is the Great Lakes, where there are Great Lakes. But whenever it's just land, we're going to set it at a particular line of latitude, and that line of latitude is 49 degrees north. Now, that only extends so far. We are going to agree to share a joint occupation of the Oregon Territory. We'll go to the map and look at the Oregon Territory in just a second. But we're not the only people that are claiming this Oregon Territory. Spain is claiming the Oregon Territory. Russia is claiming the Oregon Territory. Like they claim everything else. But the Oregon Territory is this, plus it would go all the way up to my ceiling. So it's actually part of Canada, what's now Canada too. Okay? So it's not just this part, it goes all the way up there. So the border between us and Great Britain, Canada, is the Great Lakes. But if there's not a Great Lake or there's not a river dividing, then we set the border at 49 degrees. And that is here, and this is the Oregon Territory. That's the Convention of 1818. Right? Yeah, okay. Moving on. Adams-Onis Treaty. This has to do with Spain. Sometimes this is called the Spanish Cession, and we've talked about this a little bit earlier, and this goes back to when Andrew Jackson was General Jackson before he became President Jackson. And General Jackson, he had come off his big victory in the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the War of 1812, and the president has asked General Jackson to control the Indians down on the Florida-Georgia border. Because Indians living in Florida were coming up and raiding Americans in villages up in Georgia. The Spanish owned Florida. So Andrew Jackson, he was smacking the Indians that were living on that border, but he was doing it in Spanish territory. And while he was there, he ran into some Spanish forts and some Spanish troops, so he beat up on them too. And eventually, the Spanish will ask for some talks. And Adams-Onis, Adams is John Quincy Adams, who was Secretary of State at the time. Onis is the Spanish dude. And Spain will give Florida to the United States. They also will give up their claim to the Oregon Territory. And they give their claim to the Oregon Territory to us. And they also will give up their claim on Texas, which, I mean, the Mexicans are about to win independence from Spain anyway, so this is really not a big deal. But they say that, yeah, they're moving out of what we call Texas now, and we will pay Spain $5 million. So for all of these land cessions, we have to pay Spain $5 million.
That doesn't seem like a lot.
It is not.
Why did they agree to that?
Because we were going to take Florida anyway. We kind of pretty much had with General Jackson. And they were losing Texas to the Mexicans. So they were just trying to get anything out of the deal. We threw out $5 million and they hurried up and said yes. Yeah.
I feel like everything went downhill for the Spanish.
It really did. They were like the big dogs. Yeah. They owned half the world, right? With those initial explorations.
Only for them to just
And
fall
then
apart.
they just kind of, yeah. It happens. So the Spanish Cession, yeah, this was kind of a lopsided treaty, and it was because Spain was really not in a position to negotiate. All right, so this would be the Spanish Cession here, and this part as well. All right, this is fun, the Aroostook War. Aroostook, this is an area, and I'm going to come back to that, but we're talking about this part right here. So this is Maine. All of this is Canada. So the Aroostook area is this part right here in the northern part of what's now Maine. So this is a fun little tidbit of American history. This was also known as the Lumberjack War. And the Lumberjacks did fight each other. American Lumberjacks versus Canadian, British Lumberjacks. And they were fighting over the same territory. The state of Maine will declare war on the Canadians. The British, it's Canada now, but it was Britain then. And because they felt that the British Canadians were invading American territory and chopping down trees in the state of Maine. So, that's the conflict. 2 people were killed in this war, and they were killed by black bears, not by like other lumberjacks. So it wasn't, really, super exciting, but it's kind of fun. It's our Maine lumberjacks will chase out the Canadian lumberjacks, and then the state of Maine will declare war, and Canada and Great Britain, they're like, wait, what? We're going to war with the United States again, or just the state of Maine? I'm confused. What's going on here? And by the time all of the news of what's happening up in the northern wilderness of Maine reaches Washington, D.C., the president's like, oh, really? We're going to war with Great Britain again? No, let's not do this. But Congress did get an army of about 50,000, and they set aside $10 million, but those troops never went to Maine. They were called up to duty, but they never actually went anywhere. They were still in their forts, whether it was, in Baltimore or in Cleveland, Ohio. They were just kind of put on notice, I guess you could say. But this was a show by Congress, was like, all right, we're going to do this. Come on, Great Britain, one more time, round 3. And that is going to start the talks. We're not going to do this again, are we? U.S. General Winfield Scott, who will talk about the war against Mexico, he will arrange for a peace negotiation. There is going to be talks between the United States and Great Britain to settle this and to establish a real border. Because that was the whole problem to begin with, is it was kind of like, well, we don't know where the lines are here. We don't know where Canada ends and Maine begins. So this is where this map comes in. The treaty that ends this and gives us this little chunk of Maine is known as the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. Webster as in Daniel Webster, senator from Massachusetts. Ashburton is some British guy. And we get this, the Brits, Canada, they'll take this, and everybody's happy. Oh, and look, a little pocket right here for New Hampshire. I don't know why. There might be like, well, it goes around, I don't know if it follows a river or not. But they set the border, and now everybody knows where everything is, so let's stay cool, lumberjacks. All right, let's go to Texas. Texas, and notice the dates. I have dates for Texas. This is whenever Texas was kind of its own thing. Texas will declare it to be its own republic, its own nation for a while. So we're going to be looking at Texas in these years here. So the first thing that is going to happen, Mexico is independent. Mexico is free from Spain, they're free from France. The French come and take Mexico for a while too. But Mexico is governing themselves now, and they are allowing, in fact they are recruiting, Americans to come and live in Texas, which they claimed as Mexico, it was part of Mexico, and farm and do whatever. And if they're farming and they're making profit off the land, or they're improving the land, that will help Mexico. Plus they're paying taxes, so it seemed like a good deal for everybody. So we have a group of Americans that take up this offer and they go live in Mexico. And they were calling themselves the Texicans, right? Because they were living in the Mexican state of Texas. So they call themselves the Texicans. Now the Texicans, they're living in Mexico, so they're supposed to follow the Mexican laws. And they were told, you have to follow Mexican laws. And that is, you gotta be a Catholic and obey the other Mexican laws and no slaves allowed. By 1836, Texicans, who are Americans living in the Texas part of Mexico, are going to outnumber the Mexican population by quite a bit. They were not Catholic, and most of them had slaves because they were just, the plantation system was just spreading west. And as the plantation spread west, slavery came along with it. The Mexican president at the time, who was also kind of a military dictator as well, his name was Santa Anna, and he said, I want to go up to Texas, and I want to force those Texicans to obey the Mexican laws. So Santa Anna gets on his horse, gets up an army, and he's going to go thump the Texans. All right, we're going to take a look at this.
With Spectrum Mobile and the new Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 5 and Galaxy Z Flip 5, you get faster speeds with Spectrum Speed Boost. Order through Spectrum for up to $1,000 off, plus the value of your trade-in. SpectrumMobile.com.
In 1830, Mexico banned immigration from the United States. Why? Well, one reason, slavery. But for the whole picture, we have to look to the history of Texas. Before Texas was a U.S. state and its own nation, it was part of Mexico's northern state of Coahuila y Tejas. But the region was sparsely populated and vulnerable to Native American tribes seeking to reclaim the land. So in the early 1820s, Mexico opened its northern territory to some American immigrants, with the idea that the Americans would protect the region from falling under Native American control. To entice American settlers, the government offered cheap land grants. In 1823, Stephen F. Austin became the first to receive a grant and the right to settle 300 families. Others soon followed. In exchange, the settlers agreed to speak Spanish, convert to Catholicism, become Mexican citizens, and abstain from keeping slaves. But the Americans weren't so good at holding up their end of the bargain. With little oversight from the Mexican government, most remained Protestant, spoke English, and didn't give a hoot about Mexican law. With the cotton industry booming, cheap farmland in Tejas attracted droves of cotton farmers, and cotton farms meant slaves. By 1829, Mexico realized it had a real problem. The American population in Tejas had swelled to nearly 20,000, making it practically impossible for the government to enforce the law. Mexico rightly feared it would lose Tejas to the Americans. So, on April 6, 1830, in a bid to maintain control and keep slavery out of its country, Mexico passed a law intended to curb the flood of immigration from the United States to Tejas. It didn't work. The Americans kept coming, and the law further strained Mexico's delicate relationship with the settlers. Then, to make matters worse, in 1835, Mexican President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna repealed the 1824 Mexican Constitution. He moved to centralize Mexican politics, stripping Tejas and the other Mexican states of their right to self-govern. And all hell broke loose. The settlers saw this attack on their rights as the final straw. Their only option, rebellion. But Santa Anna was prepared to put any dissent down, and violently. In early 1836, he marched his troops north. Remember the Alamo? On February 23, 1836, Santa Anna launched a 13-day siege on the settlers' Catholic mission turned fortress. When he finally penetrated the walls, he slaughtered nearly every person inside, ending the battle, but not the war. The settlers called in reinforcements from the states, promising land and free passage. 1 month later, General Sam Houston launched a surprise attack at San Jacinto, capturing Santa Anna and forcing him to sign away Mexican ownership of Texas. The newly independent Texans were psyched. As an independent entity, they would be free to join the United States, where slavery was legal. But oh, the irony. Slavery, which had greatly influenced their bid for independence, now practically extinguished any chances they had for statehood. Because back in the US, Congress was grappling with the spread of slavery as their nation expanded westward. Annexation of Texas would bring in another slave state. As Congress debated how to maintain the balance, Texas remained in a state of limbo. For nearly 10 years, Texas struggled as an independent nation, suffering from economic instability and border disputes with Mexico. Finally, in 1845, Texas was admitted to the Union, but it was short-lived. 15 years later, Texas would secede from the U.S. as the country headed towards a civil war over the issue of slavery.
Alright, so Texas, lots of history in Texas. That's not where I wanted to be. Here's where I want to be. Okay. So Texas, 1836 is whenever we start seeing the conflict between the Texicans and Mexico. So 1836, Texas will declare its independency from Mexico, and then Santa Anna will go and invade and try to retake. Although Mexico, they never recognized Texas independence. They just thought those crazy Americans, and we'll just go beat them up and put them in their place. But whenever Texas declared its independence, they meant it. And Texas goes to war against Mexico. So Stephen Austin, that should be a V. He's a Stefan guy. S-T-E-P-H, right? A-N probably. Stephen Austin, he is the guy that will lead the first Americans into Texas. He gets those first land grants from Mexico. And notice the date that he dies. He dies a young man. He's only 3 years old-ish. And he will die in the Texas War for Independence against Mexico. Here we go, 1836. This is when they declare their independence and when Santa Anna gets on his horse to go take care of business. Sam Houston is going to be the president of Texas. And he will survive the war, as you can tell here. So, just like in the video, you can see that Santa Anna and the Mexican armies are coming up into Texas. Everywhere you see a little starburst is a battle, and the orange are Mexican victories, and the green are Texan victories. The most famous Mexican victory, and probably the most famous battle of the war, is the Alamo. And the Alamo is still standing in San Antonio, Texas today. In fact, it is, like in downtown San Antonio, Texas. And it's a big tourist attraction. I went there 2 spring breaks ago, and it's a nice little tour. This is actually a picture I got from my aunt. This is my uncle. His name is Dick, and he was posing in front of the Alamo. He's dead. That's okay. It's fine. But he did, because he's dead now. He did have the best name ever, and it's my aunt. It was husband number 3. I think it only lasted a few years. But his last name was Munch, and I'm not making this up. His mama named him Richard Munch, but he did not go by Richard. A common nickname for Richard is Dick. Why it's not Rich, I don't know, but it's Dick, so his name was Dick Munch. Great names. All right, so the Alamo. Davy Crockett is a famous Kentuckian that will be in and he was living in Texas for a few years before the war starts. And he will be a defender of the Alamo, and he'll be one of the many, many people that are killed inside the Alamo. Santa Anna's army will surround the Alamo, and they will tell the Texicans inside the Alamo, y'all just surrender. We outnumber, outgun you. Just surrender, please. And the Texicans were like, no, never surrender. And there was a flag in the video that said, come and get it. And there's a picture of a cannon, or come take it, or something like that. They made that flag there, and so the Mexicans did. They bombed the Alamo, they charged it, and pretty much every last Texican in the Alamo was killed, man, women, and children, but there weren't a lot of women and children. They had been released earlier. And there's a lot of famous stories about this Battle of the Alamo, and it becomes like a rallying cry for all of the Texans. Remember the Alamo, and we have to seek vengeance against the Mexicans for the slaughter at the Alamo. To kind of wrap up the story of Texas, yeah, the Texans got beat at the Alamo, but this is the battle that settles the war. Just a few months after the Battle of the Alamo, there is another battle at San Jacinto, and the Texicans win that battle, and they capture Santa Anna. Santa Anna is at that battle, and he is now a prisoner of the Texans. And pretty much the Texans were like, hey, we'll let you live, you can go back to Mexico City, just recognize Texas independence. So that is how that deal was made. I mean, whenever you capture your opponent's president, and he's like an autocrat, and he wants to live, that's probably a good thing for your side. So this is what ends the war. Because the Texicans caught Santa Anna and held him as prisoner, he agreed to recognize Texan independence. Like the video suggests, the Texans were like, hip hip hooray, and now we can be Americans again, because that's what they really wanted. They did not want to be independent Texas, because what if the Mexicans regroup and come back, right? San Jacinto was a lucky deal. That was like one of the few battles they had won in that whole war. So they wanted to be part of the United States. They wanted the protection of the United States, and they wanted, slavery's legal, so let's join the U.S. But the U.S. will say no all the way until 1845. So they asked a couple of times. It takes a while, but eventually Texas will become part of the U.S. in 1845. Annex, we're going to run into this word quite a bit. Annex, this is what annex means. That it's like a peaceful, both sides agree takeover. All right? So the United States annexed Texas. That means both sides wanted it, and no money, no war, no bloodshed. It's just, okay, an agreement. That's an annexation. And it becomes a state, and it's going to be a slave state. And we'll get to that compromise in a bit. All right, last thing we're going to look at is overland immigration, meaning, the wagon trains and settlers moving out west. So in this time period, in 20 years, you got about 250,000 people are moving westward. You can see there's a couple of spikes In the late 1840s, you see a couple of big spikes going to Utah. Well, and the screen one's total. So this big spike here is not Utah, California. And why are people heading to California starting in 1848?
Gold Rush.
Yeah, the gold rush. So you see most of the people going to California in 1849, and they're called the 49ers because that's the year, 1849. And if you're NFL football fans, San Francisco, their team is the San Francisco 49ers because that's where you go to start getting your supplies to go to the mountains to look for gold. The largest city at the time there was San Francisco. So you see a big spike here. You see a bigger spike here in the mid-50s, and we'll talk about what that is. But you also see a couple of little other spikes in these other places. So Oregon, California, Utah, these are generally your destinations in this period before the Civil War. California because of the gold rush. Oregon because of free land. And Utah, who's going to Utah?
Mormon.
Yeah, the Mormons. And it's usually just the Mormons. So there were a couple of trails that had been established that were safe-ish. I mean, it's a dangerous journey. But these, if you stay on these marked trails, you have a better shot. So these westward trails were mapped out, and people usually went on them in these wagon trains in groups because it's safety in numbers. So this would be a good example of a romantic style painting in the Hudson River School tradition, right? Because of the natural scene and the awesomeness of nature that it is showing. We can't forget about these guys. So probably the most famous family to make this trek westward was the Donner family. And they take off from Independence, Missouri in April of 1846. And they get really, really close. I mean, as the crow flies, they were 10 miles from their destination in safety and a fort. But they did make it. We got a short little video that we're going to take a look at about the Donner Party.
It's tough, but the going's good. Tamsin Donner writes in her journal.
I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty. Indeed, if we do not experience anything worse, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started.
But as leader of the wagon train, Tamsin's husband George Donner is aware there's one final obstacle to their journey. The Sierra Nevada. Peaks up to 14,000 feet. Fail to clear the mountain passes before the first snow falls. The consequences are terrifying. But as the Donner Party approaches Utah, George Donner makes a fateful decision, getting a splinter group off from the main party. He's read one of the many new trail guidebooks, showing the shortcut that claims to shave 2 weeks off the journey time.
Hastings Cutoff is said to be a saving of 400 miles. We are informed it is a fine level road with plenty of water and grass.
But Donner's information is wrong. In fact, the shortcut adds 100 miles to the journey.
Sierra Nevada, the Donner Party enters the Truckee Pass. They're only 30 miles from the California plains. But supplies are dangerously low, and traveling through the mountains is taking its toll. A broken axle. The Donner Party stops to make repairs. But that night, 5 feet of snow falls. Soon, the drifts are 60 feet deep. The Donner Party will be stranded for 5 months. In just 3 weeks, they've eaten all their food. Then, they kill their pack animals. Next, they eat charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves, dirt, and worse.
Even the wind held its breath as the suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live.
Cannibalism. Christmas 1846. They eat their first human. Bodies are cut up, flesh labeled, so people don't eat their own kin. Four rescue parties bring out some survivors. The very last finds Philippine's husband, Ludwig, alone. He is surrounded by bones, entrails, and a 2-gallon kettle of human blood. George Donner's body is found, skull split open, his brain removed. Tamsin Donner's body is never found.
That's a broken
just
ending.
cut off.
Yeah. But that was toward the end of the little segment. So the Donner Party, that has been, you know, the horror story of this westward expansion. A lot of people didn't make it. It was a dangerous journey, not just getting caught in the snow in the mountains, but also Native American attacks were not unheard of. Just crossing rivers, you have to cross a river every now and then that's dangerous, and the wagon could go under, the horse could drown, you can drown. There's 1,001 things that could kill you on this trip. And these people just, they ran into one of the worst pieces of luck. The night they would have been there the next day if that stupid wagon axle hadn't broken. You know, it's just bad luck. Yeah. All right, the last bit before we look at the BBQ. Let's settle up the Oregon Territory. So I told you that the Oregon Territory was what is nowadays the state of Oregon, the state of Washington, some of California, but also Idaho, some bits of Montana. It's a big chunk of land. And it goes all the way into what's now Canada. And this is part of Alaska even, this little bit. So it's a huge territory. So we have a lot of Americans heading out to Oregon. In fact, in the mid-1840s, they called it Oregon fever, because it was, you could get free land in Oregon, and everybody has been saying that it's beautiful land, you can farm anything, it's, birds fall out of the sky into your frying pan. It was like supposed to be this promised land for anybody that wanted to make the journey out there to live and to farm. President candidate James K. Polk. And Polk is, where is he? He's this guy. He's the guy with the best mullet of all of our presidents. James K. Polk, when he's running for president, his campaign slogan is 54-40 or fight. And what he means is that he will, if he's elected president, he would set the northern boundary of Oregon, the northern boundary of the United States, at 54-40, 54 degrees, 40 minutes north latitude, which is right here. He said, I will get all of this Oregon territory for the United States. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't happen, right? A lot of campaign promises don't happen. After he wins the election, there is negotiating between us and Great Britain, and pretty much we agree to split the difference and to just extend that old 49 degree for the Louisiana Purchase territory all the way out to the ocean. So this becomes the boundary, the line at 49 degrees. Now, and quite honestly, we did not get a whole lot of what you would call the disputed territory, because everybody kind of recognized that this was U.S. territory. The green is what was disputed. And we kind of got the short end of the stick on that one. But it makes a nice clean border. Everything's at 49 degrees, the northern border between us and Canada. All right, so that just leaves this, and we'll take care of this tomorrow. And then that'll be it, and that's the war. Yeah, baby. Yes, I'll go ahead and approve it. All right, we're gonna go back to our DPQ if you want to dig that out, please.
Not Hannah. Hannah, don't miss out on too often. These to get to know CBO. My name is not Hannah. Don't miss out on your opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you.
And after you dig out the DPQ, because I know you haven't looked at it since this time yesterday, just flip through the documents one more time to remind yourself what's what.
Hannah, don't miss out on your opportunity.
Alright, I'm gonna bring up the lights here.
Which one we did yesterday? Second. Has this Brennan reply to you? No.
That I would like for us to take a look at and see how we have gotten through this. This is kind of the first steps, I think, are very effective in planning to write this essay. Obviously, you have to start with the prompt and you have to know exactly what it's asking and understand what the task is, okay? So our prompt is about how did industries, they don't use the word industry, how did, or evaluate the extent to which commercial development changed U.S. society in this period. So how much did commercial development change society in this period? So that's the first thing we have to do. The next thing, and this is, we're going to spend a lot of time on this part. You can take a, for the suggested writing time on this, from first seeing the question to putting the period on that last sentence and moving on, it suggests an hour, but that gives you, that leaves some time, I think too much time for the LEQ. I say you should spend about an hour 15 on the DBQ. And a good chunk of that time is gonna be spent doing this. Because if you do this properly, step 2 and 3, then everything else ought to really work out. And it ought to be easy to write, okay? The planning part should take time. And I would suggest maybe even 30 minutes in the planning process, okay? Because you have a whole chunk of time on the exam to write the DBQ and the LEQ. The DBQ has more weight to it. It's, I wanna say it's 25% of the final score on the exam, and the LEQ is only 15%. I'll double check those numbers, but this one's worth more. So we ought to treat it like it's worth more, okay? So, anyway, I cannot overstress the importance of doing the planning before you actually start composing. So we did this yesterday. We went through, we marked up the documents. I told you specifically to do this. How do the documents answer the prompt? And then we kind of talked about this in outside evidence. And this is something that you'll start doing rather automatically the more we practice this, because, you know, obviously you need to use the documents to answer the prompt, but you also need to hit, our goal now is 4 of these accurately. And then you need to have another piece of evidence that's not included in the documents that can support your argument as well. And remember, like for this document, we thought maybe you could talk about Robert Fulton, right? Or other transportation and how that is going to help industry as well, like early on the Erie Canal. So there was, as you're going through the documents, we ought to be doing all of this as we're marking them up, okay, or doing notes around them, okay? What we want to do today, and practice today, is this part. So we are going to try to do like your standard 5-paragraph essay, right? So in our first paragraph, you're going to have your contextualization, and you're going to have your thesis. Thesis, okay? So that's in your first paragraph, contextualization and your thesis. And then you have your body paragraphs. And so you got 1, you got 2, you got 3. And these collectively, these are your main points to your answer that answer the prompt. All right, so your thesis is going to be something like commercial development during 1800 to 1855 greatly changed American society by, and you're listing really the topics of these. These are your big 3 answers.
Could you stop mine?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I'll do that right now. All right, and then conclusion. In the conclusion, you are going to restate your thesis. And some folks like to do a counter argument here. Like for this particular skill, it's asking about continuity and change. How much did it change? So you could do you could go for the complexity point here. And that would be the counter argument. And then obviously you would end with this because you always want to end with your argument. You don't want to make any. Now, if you're not going to do the counter argument for your complexity point, then your conclusion paragraph is just a restatement of your thesis. Okay? You might highlight a couple of your main points, but you're looking at 2 or 3 sentences in this conclusion if you're not going to do this part. Okay? Now, having said that, one of these body paragraphs could be a complexity, it could be a counter argument. It just depends on how you want to organize it and what best fits the answer for you. Okay. But you ought to model it like this, a standard 3-paragraph essay. Context thesis in the intro. 3 body paragraphs. 1 paragraph per main point. And then you're putting the documents here. How the documents answer the question.
The 7 documents, if you were to do like 6 in the body, could you do a 7th for the complexity and it still count as all 7?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think but if you're going, yes. Like I was looking at this yesterday.
Oh yeah.
And I was thinking that I actually, well, and I don't want to get into that now. I'm going to let you do this. I'm going to let y'all work on this part first. And then I'll share how, if this was my task and I had to answer it, how I would organize the documents. And what my 1, 2, 3 would be about. Okay? So this is the job I want you to work on right now. Is now that if you haven't looked at all the documents yet, you need to know the documents. So if you need to go back and do some of this, go back and do some of this. But between now and let's say 12:35, that gives us about 20 minutes here, I want you to have this part done. We're putting documents that answer the question in the same way together, right? How many documents do we have to use?
3, I think. 3.
Okay, lots of different numbers here. Okay,
Wait, hold up.
so.
I believe it's 2.
All right, and that's a
4
trick
documents.
question. How many do you have to use? Get, yes, the absolute minimum, I would say, is 4. Now, if you want to get that 0.7 by using all the documents, you can, right? If you're looking at this one of these documents like, yeah, I don't know how that fits, then you're like, yeah, I can't get the 7th point with that. I'm going to have to get the 7th point another way. Okay? And another way to get the 7th point is to hip for the documents, right? Yes. That is the next to the last bullet from the bottom, hipping for documents.
Could we use the same hit for every single document?
Like historical context for every single document, like the same H or I or P or P. Yes. Now, of course, the hit for this is the guy who is saying, workers shouldn't drink, right?
Yeah.
You could definitely use his point, this is written for a church, and the churches, particularly Protestant churches, are very motivated with, you know, they are part of the temperance movement, so they are advising employers to do this. So that would be a good point of view hip. And, yeah, Frederick Douglass, you could use point of view that, but his point of view is obviously different. But yes, you can do, all four of your hips can be a point of view, the last of the E's.
How do you incorporate the hips?
Yeah, we're gonna get to that part tomorrow, but yes, we're gonna do this first. How are you gonna put these together, and what's gonna be your big answer? Okay? So by doing this grouping and how these documents answer the question, when we do this, then the thesis is real easy, right? Because you already know how the documents answer the question, so you just need to put that in a sentence at the end of the prompt. That's your thesis. So, but we gotta figure out how to group these documents first. Which ones are you going to use, and how are you saying they answer the question? All right, feel free to talk if you want to talk to a buddy. And we'll talk in about 15 minutes. It's so bright outside. I love the brightness.
Okay, are we still doing number 7? Because we haven't done that one yet.
Yeah,
Oh, I have I think for 4 and 6, maybe one, but new labor group. So 6 is about women, and then 4 is about child labor. 1 is about drunks in the workplace, but I don't know if that fits. But yeah. Are you grouping those two? 4 and 6, yeah, I think so. I don't really understand this one. Have you finished it? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Where did you put for 7? Like, have you done 7?
Okay, so I grouped 5, 6, and 7
Okay.
as labor in the workforce. Because 5 is talking about how free African Americans are thriving outside of slavery.
Right.
Or 6 is talking about women in the workforce.
Yes. Uh-huh.
7 is also talking about slaves,
Right.
free slaves and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And then I said, I used 2 and 3 about like financial change, because 3 has like, set like.
3 is the
student,
slave.
And then, what else?
2 and 3.
Two has,
I would put one sales of the.
three is like the sale.
I would put 1 and 4 together
Yes.
because in one, so you're talking about how many farmers appear. So like
Yes.
more together, 1 and 4.
I focus more on like the problem of drinking that had been.
Yeah.
I'm putting because like if we're answering the problem of the hip, I'm putting that more jobs appear, more like manufacturing jobs appear basically.
Yes.
So you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, oh yeah, I keep thinking about it. Yes. Okay. But it's like,
And I would put 6 also there. I know. 1, 6, and 4. So all talk
That's
about
what I was
opportunities.
yeah.
Like more opportunities for working. Then for 2 we can use only second document, for example. And for other we can use 3, 5, and 7. Second we can put transportation and communication. 3 we can put for 7. Okay, let's talk about science document first. So basically, the main part for him it's abolition. Nothing. Okay. I found the universal suffrage.
Wait, this has universal suffrage?
If the working man goes to the ballot box and gives his vote. So now we're talking about just
right.
working man.
yes.
Maybe 5 and.
Yeah, you don't have to.
No,
It's
never mind.
depends on what you're talking about. So like,
We can. Oh, I know. We can put 3. Combine 3 and 5.
3 and 5. Right.
Black people life changed also. Okay. So we can say, in the south they got more slavery. In the north they got more opportunities. Yes.
even though I didn't really have a great place to put that, so I put it with that.
So now we have
And 7,
2
we
and
can
6.
connect 7 and
Slavery, so it said like the Great Labor, you lower its premium rates, it ranges any portion of the country, reduced to like slave and free those extends more like slavery. So I think that's not necessarily.
I think what Blair said 2 and 3 are good too. 2 and 3. Like Blair said. Because this one, like,
oh, right.
3 is,
We need only 3 to combine in 3 groups. 2, 3, 40 paragraphs. We need to combine documents and main points.
wait, you already have 3?
1, 6, and 4.
Uh-huh.
Manufacturing jobs.
Right.
2, just 2.
Oh, just, you can do that?
Why not?
But it says group the documents.
Yeah, you're grouping. And I'm just grouping out to us.
2, okay.
Like, why not? What would it be for 7's document? Like, where would you put that?
Universal suffrage, you can say that.
But like where? In which part of the? I already have.
Oh,
3
right,
points.
because you need 3.
So, what would you say for 7's document?
Just put it with 3 and 5 because not one of my friends is going to talk about how slavery changed the slavery, whatever.
Yeah,
And it talks about like free
I don't really
slaves, not free
understand.
slaves, free black. I don't understand it. And if I was writing it, I would not use 7
Okay,
or
so main
1.
thing we're talking right now.
Where'd you put 2?
About the
Yeah, I'm not
prompt.
talking about hip. I'm talking
Yeah,
about the prompt.
how it answered the prompt. 7's document.
I don't know. I'm not going to actually use it. I just put it in there because I don't know.
Yeah,
What
I
else.
would group. I have 1, 6, and 4. 2, 3, 7.
Where'd you put 2?
I have it by itself because it doesn't
okay.
really relate to anything. But I don't know.
You can put a lot of there, and you can do.
Yes, because like if you only use 4 and you're doing a 3, yeah.
There you go. And we can talk about
Now,
here.
pro tip, I would never just use 4 documents, because if you like totally screw up one and it's incomplete, then obviously you can't get that point. So I would use 5 just in case.
Okay. So we can do 2 by itself, and we can put their transportation, and we can combine with that outside evidence.
I just need to find
It will be like 2.
Yeah, I have 2. I just need to find. Well, we don't really need 7, but I want to find like a. What is it? Like,
What
is
I
it?
did was I
Yeah, how
just
it's
saw it
related.
Yeah.
as if I was writing. I know she said to group them.
Right.
So like if I was gonna group them, I'd put 1, 4, and 6, 3, 5, and 7. But if I was writing this by myself, I would use document 2 and then group document 4 and 6 together, because labor, I would use 1. Like me personally, I don't want to. 1 is kind of iffy. I don't think I could do anything with
Only
1.
thing I'm
Yeah.
using there is this is good for him, but only thing I'm using there for the
It's also just not enough information.
Yeah, like the only one thing is like the farmers. I'm like, okay.
because my first topic is how a lot of manufacturing jobs get over farmers.
3 and 7 together.
3 and 7.
Because it's
I don't know, like we think.
And I'm
Do you
not
understand 7?
So okay, so basically 7's talking about if people vote for slavery / for slaveholders, it only harms them because of declining wages until they themselves become slaves to the system.
But how is it declined
Yeah, it
wages?
declines wages because you have free labor that you just buy for a life, and you didn't pay every month.
Because they can just use slaves for work,
Yeah.
and they don't have to pay them.
say that one more time. It's not clicking yet.
Okay.
Say what you just said.
Do you want me to explain
Okay,
it
so
to
what
you
I wrote
easier?
down
Hold on. I want to hear what he said.
If people vote for slavery / slaveholders, it only hurts them with declining wages till they themselves become slaves to the system.
Oh, so like if
It's
you vote
easier-
for slave owners.
It's like-
Slavery
so
will be
like,
in a
okay,
whole
if
country, and it will
people
be
continue
more
to
profitable
vote
to
for
have slaves than.
politicians that are slaveholders and that are
Yeah.
for slaves, it's only going to hurt them because they're going to experience declining wages until they themselves just become slaves.
I know how we can combine it.
Slaves.
I know how we can combine it.
Yeah, 3 and 7
No,
is
no, no.
good.
I know how
Yeah.
we can combine it. But we answering the prompt, not the slavery part. So.
But
we
slavery
need to-
can't answer the prompt, right?
Yeah.
Because it.
But how? What's
what
the
I
point? What the
put
point
was
would
My
be?
point would be
How
because
like
of like
slavery increased during
It
the
can
Yeah,
talk about
yeah,
advances
because
of slavery
it's
for the
the
work
industrialization of
and how it like shifted
And
from
five,
like less people
Right.
actually working for them using slaves.
Exactly.
Okay, my topics, points are, first one is that manufacturing jobs appeared more. From one I'm using that it took over farmers. I'm using 1, so where is it called about people, 6, whereas they are talking about, what is it talking about 6? Women got opportunities to work and working opportunities. And 4, I'm talking about child labor?
Yeah.
Child labor. Then second one is my just transportation and side evidence. I'm just using
Would y'all say
And
group?
3?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
just finished. And I will use for
4
third
and 6, would y'all group that together?
Yeah, that's what we did. Mhm.
Like talk
third
about
point,
conditions
I
of
would
working
use-
in
Yeah.
Okay,
total
that's what I
each point, and then we make evidence. I would use let's people
So I just need
how
to
to
use
change.
one.
So 3, I would use that slavery increased in South. In North, we have free American, African Americans more opportunities for job, more businesses spend more. And 7, I would use that slavery increased that much that even in North they were start talking about, oh, we don't need to for slavery, like.
That's not good.
Like it increased so much due to industrialization that even in wars they were like, no slavery here. No. So what do you think? Does it make sense?
yes. I'm using 5 documents.
Okay,
Yeah, I have
someone
1,
explain
4, and
document
6,
5
3, and
because I
5.
cannot wrap my head
You have 6?
Basically, the main
6.
thing
Which one are you using? Oh, you're using 1?
One with labor group and labor, work conditions. Oh my god.
we talked even like got opportunity to work and spend money. Right. They follow blah. This is all.
Yeah, and then
Document 5 is like how free black people still contributed to consumers. What did he say? Something like that. Like
I think I wrote it. Let me see. Yeah, that one really like
See if it's fine
too.
But they were also concealers.
Yeah,
That's what I
well,
had.
the African Americans brought commercial goods,
My
so they contributed, I guess. And yeah, that's I put that as the African American lives changed because some of them were wealthy and could buy goods, and then slavery. Yeah, and then second was number 2 was transportation. That's what I put. I probably won't use 7, but
Yeah, I don't know.
farmers.
I see the point of 7, but I don't think I could talk about it. Same
like I
thing
don't know
with
how
1.
I would say like because like other than like slavery was so popular that it declined wages. I don't know how that.
I was like, that's the only line I would be able to put down.
Yeah.
What are you saying for 1?
One, I was saying how.
Yes.
Okay, I labeled it as new labor group and well not new but like labor groups and work condition. So like number 1 is how like the drunk people were now in the workplace instead of at home. So it kind of changed like the work condition and then 4 and 6, where the woman and child. Yeah.
I'm using 6 documents.
Go ahead.
I did not think of it like that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this is just talking about drunk people.
Yeah,
But
that's what they were saying yesterday, and I wrote it down, and I was like,
they cooked on that.
because Sia was saying how they like it used to be just farmers, but now they added that. So, but then this connects more. With
That connects. Yeah, I was like, I got that point, but then it would be like another 7. Like I wouldn't have anything to say about that. But that point, I get that.
Exactly.
That makes sense now.
Look at us go.
1 is now valid.
Look at us go. Look at us go.
So now we have to write the thesis.
Right. Okay.
Alright, so if you feel good about writing a thesis, go ahead and get that written out. If you have your groupings done, your thesis.
I was trying to find the
will
question. I was
be
like, where's the
derived.
question? But it's up here.
Are you doing it? Are you writing your thesis at the back?
Probably that's a good idea.
Mhm.
Go with the extent which.
No, that's okay. I was just, I can see where it's going, except for this, so I was gonna look at your documents. Alright, so instead of this, I like better what you have over here.
Okay.
So the economy was increasing, let's just change this phrase to economic expansion.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question.
We could just say commercial.
And I'm sure the way you would have written it, it would have been just fine,
Yes.
but that's just more
Because
on
I was
the
gonna
nose.
focus more on like how it raised a problem with like the wages of
Yes.
people and how that was affecting the society between like the slave trade, like this, or whether the slaves were should even be a problem.
Right, yes, exactly.
Can I use 7's document as I have a point about integral vegetable life? And can I use this one as saying like due to industrialization in South, slavery increased so much that even in North they start talking about we don't need it here like that slavery in South got influenced that much in North. So do you see what I'm saying?
So slavery in the South, and repeat, increased,
Due to industry
right,
that much that even in the North they start saying that like we don't need it here. So people even in the North start thinking about slavery. It's saying like we don't need it.
yeah. So, and I just wanna make sure that you're clear on,
Have you written yours yet?
No.
like the folks that are.
I don't know how to like
Say
say
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than
They're all-
the slavery one, increased slavery.
Yeah.
Right,
Oh wait, no, change.
obviously,
That's a good way to say it. I
yes,
just don't know how to
even
say the word
Northerners
or
are
the.
promoting slavery
Yeah.
because they need the raw
Commercial,
materials
because
produced
of-
by the slaves. And, they are
New
making
work
a lot of profit
condition?
off of that.
No.
So can I-
Because of.
I don't know.
Okay,
But
I want to put a couple of things up on the board.
What the leg? And the economic expansion and Labor groups.
Labor groups.
Labor groups.
Oh, yes.
You ain't ready for this.
All right. Yeah, I'll make that bigger too, because I know that's impossible to read. Where are we at? All right, what we're going to look at right now is what the College Board says are good thesis statements, which will kind of let you know how these folks are using the documents, grouping the documents together. So let me make this bigger. And we are looking at the bullets here. Okay. So these two, this one is minimally acceptable, but let's look at these two first. Commercial development greatly changed the U.S. society by creating new national economic connections and facilitating stronger divisions over the institution of slavery. That sounds like a two-body paragraph essay. They might have a third one in there, but this is acceptable. Commercial development changed United States society by encouraging wage labor. So they're going to be talking about factory work there. So the ones about the children in the factory, and then you can't drink in the factory maybe. Fostering religious reform movements, which I'm sure they're going to be talking about temperance, because there's two about stop drinking. And allowing more women to work outside the home. So, these are some categories that you could have used, but it's not the end-all be-all of it. I wouldn't have given that the point. I'm not sure why that got the point, but that's, College Board. The way I was looking at this, I was going to have a grouping that said introduce factory work into the U.S., and that was a big change in society with the market revolution. I was going to mention a national economy, how the North and the South become more connected through infrastructure, but also through the cotton trade. And then I was going to mention slavery as well. And I was thinking you could do it a couple of different ways. You could either support it was a great change, or you could make it contradictory, saying that, Southern society didn't change much because they're still agricultural and reliant on slave labor, while the North has moved on to industry and others.
And then for the complexity point, would you just do the opposite of whatever you did, right?
Right. So that would be, so you could either use the documents that focus on slavery or the successful free black people in support of great change, or you could use it as a counter argument. I think it would work either way. Because in the document about the successful free black people, that last little bit says, they still have to put up with a lot of crap from whites, right? So that hasn't changed any. So there's a lot of ways you could use the same document. And that actually used to be a point under an old rubric, is using the document multiple different ways. It supports this, but it also supports that.
For complexity point, do you need to use evidence from one of the documents, or you can use outside evidence?
You can use outside. Yeah. If you're just going to do the contradictory point, change and continuity, you don't have to use a document to support it. You can use all outside evidence. Okay. All right. So seeing what you did, what they say are acceptable, and notice this is in quotes. These are like lifted from students' tests last May. What do you think? How do you feel? Do you think you're on the right track here?
Yeah.
Okay. So, some DBQs, I think they're easier to plan and particularly see how documents fit together and answer the question. I think this one was actually kind of difficult, to be honest with you, with how the documents may fit together. Maybe it's just me.
Because you have to like really think
I had a
about
hard
it.
time with it.
There's different options.
Yes, and there's different options, and there's no one correct way. You can use them in a lot of different ways. So tomorrow, whenever we come back, we're gonna finish up manifest destiny, go north Mexico, and kind of wrap things up with that. And then we're going to actually write out, well, first we're gonna talk about what can we use for contextualization. We're gonna get that contextualization point. And then we're going to talk about how do you specifically write a good couple of sentences that will use the document properly and hit it properly. We're going to talk about how we kind of format that. Okay? So we're just kind of baby stepping this, and then we'll practice some more next